once again at the bottom of the hour. But before we do all of that, the task of keeping our friend awake, Dr. Raywat Deonandan is his name, and he's an epidemiologist. He's an associate professor at the University of Ottawa. And the reason we brought him back is because we need to talk about the variant or variants right now that everyone is very, very concerned with around the world, and now, of course, in this country. Dr. Deonandan, before we do anything else, let's clear up this problem that you have alluded to yourself on your social media platform about your concern about staying awake because it's 11:06 where you are in Ottawa. What's the concern, sir? Is it that your baby keeps you up all night?
Well, my 8-month-old has not been napping or sleeping on schedule today, and so I've been struggling to put him to sleep, and that expends a lot of energy on my part, so I'm a little exhausted right now. That's okay. I'm here to talk to you, and you're an inspiring, energetic guy, so I'm sure you'll keep me awake.
That's all right. Listen, I love honesty. I love candor. And there you are on social media saying, I'm about to do a national show. And I hope I can, I hope I can stay awake. Is your baby awake right now?
No, he's asleep, and I'm in the basement hiding from him in case my voice wakes him up.
So many people across the country right now completely identify with what you're experiencing. All right, let's talk about the variant. We got two variants to talk about. I hope it'll remain two. My fear is that it'll become 22 at some point, but let's just stay with the two. One is the so-called UK variant, and the other is the South African. What are we talking about here, and what are we talking about when it comes to Canada?
So we talk about variants, first of all. They're just different versions of the COVID virus, and mutations happen all the time. Mutations happening in ourselves as we speak. It's just that rarely a mutation arises that is beneficial to the thing that is mutating. So in this case, a mutation has arisen in the virus that makes it better in the sense that it's more attuned to its environment. So the UK variant, B117 we call it, appears to spread more easily, and that's probably because it binds to the cell surfaces a bit more easily and infects you more easily. And the South African variant has a similar characteristic. Additionally, it may be able to elude our immune system a bit more easily as well. All of these mutations are occurring on what's called the spike protein, which is a big protein on the surface of the COVID virus. And that protein is what the vaccines and our immune system use to identify it. So it's pretty important that we're able to continue to identify that protein. Luckily, it's a large protein, and the mutations are relatively small. So apparently the vaccines can still identify them. Now, our concern, other than the fact that the vaccines might not have been able to target the virus, is that if these strains become dominant, then we're in a new level of crisis. Because right now we struggle to contain the current dominant variant of COVID. We can't keep it out of our long-term care centers. We struggle to prevent the transmission from happening. If the UK strain becomes more dominant, it's 56% more transmissible. That makes it even harder to keep out of our sensitive areas, and the stakes get higher. So I think the stakes have gotten higher because those strains are now, those variants rather, are now present in Canada, and they will become dominant eventually unless we can get ahead of them by curtailing transmission and vaccinating even faster.
So without getting into thousands of numbers, which just make the eyes glaze over, it works better on television when you've got charts. You're doing it on radio, it's a little more cumbersome. So if you could just help me out with this question. Have we had a significant acceleration of infections and deaths in the UK itself because of the so-called UK variant?
It does appear so. Now, you can't know for sure, but if you look at the epidemic curve, there are some peaks that seem to coincide with this arrival. So it looks like transmission is accelerating the rate of infection there. However, the UK has a very good advantage, and that is they have a lot more vaccine than we do, and they have more vaccines that have been licensed. They have the AstraZeneca dose, for example, and so they're able to deploy that much faster. But we don't want to be them. One of my friends over there calls it Plague Island. You know, they're really struggling under the burden of this variant. So this is very concerning for scientists. If In Barrie, Ontario, which is down, a few hundred miles from where I am right now in Ottawa, has a long-term care center that had an outbreak of this UK variant, and it tore through the population very, very quickly, lightning speed. That's deeply concerning because we already struggle to keep it out of long-term care centers. And if this new variant didn't have purchase in such a sensitive and vulnerable environment, then our elderly population truly is at risk. So I hate to repeat myself, but we really have to vaccinate the vulnerable as quickly as we can, which makes this deficit of vaccine supply in Canada even more striking and worrying.
Dr. Deonandan, when you use this phrase, we keep it out, we're trying to keep it out. Are we, and what are we doing to keep it out? I don't have the impression that behavior has changed significantly. So what are we missing here?
Yeah, you make a good point. The behavior has not changed significantly. Now, the things that work for the current variant work for the new variant: distancing, mask wearing, limiting gatherings. But what it means is the margin of error is smaller, so we cannot tolerate lesser compliance. Now, other things that we can do, we could explore domestic travel restrictions, so prevent travelers from moving from places where we know the variant is present to places where they're not present, or set up a cordon around those places where we know outbreaks have taken place. We probably should curtail international travel more so that we don't spread it around the world. In fact, another thing to consider is not only is moving the variant around the world a bad idea, but the more infection of any kind of COVID that happens, the more opportunity for mutation occurs. So if we want to slow the potential arising of vaccine-resistant variants in the future, we need to slow infection. Because if you can't find a host, you can't find a mutation. So those are the things we have to keep on doing. In other words, we keep doing what we're already doing, we just do it better.
So we've got hundreds of thousands of crossings every day, land crossings, because of commercial reasons. The United States trades with us and we trade with them. And much of the trade involves food. If we wanted to shut the land border down, the price of the groceries would go crazy. And there are many groceries that we wouldn't have. And I'm just giving you one small example. Are you or other doctors recommending closing the land border with the United States?
That's an economic question, and I'm not an economist, but I would say it's probably not feasible to do so, and I don't know where our food would come from, and the chaos that would ensue if we diminished the flow of essential items like that would not be pleasant. So I think it's probably easier to control and test those crossing the border than there is to actually, stop it. And I'm here talking about essential travel. Recreational travel, of course, should not be happening at all. So things we could do at the border for, truck drivers and other people who are carrying our essential goods. Rapid testing. We have rapid testing capacity. We should use it and use it often. We could have public health keep track of such individuals in the case of symptoms arising, and have good contact tracing to see who they're in contact with when they cross the border. So these things that we're not doing as well as we could be, not because public health has failed, it's because the resources have not been applied here. So we can double down on things like, again, rapid testing, backwards contact tracing, which we can talk about, and these will allow us to contain outbreaks if they occur and prevent them from happening in the first place.
So, Dr. Deonandan, you do a lot of shows, which I appreciate. You're all over social media. You're working hard despite the fact that you've got an infant who keeps you up all night. So don't you get really, really frustrated when month after month you talk about what we could be doing and what we should be doing, but we're not doing it? Rapid testing and contact tracing, we don't do nearly enough of that. And so on the one hand, the government says, that we've got this new variant and it's more dangerous and it's much more transmissible. And then we've got you coming on who totally understands all of this. And we're still talking about what we could be doing at the border, but we're not doing. So I'm just going to ask, I don't mean to play shrink here. That's not my point at all. But on some level, you must be awfully frustrated constantly talking about what works in the abstract when you don't see the application of same.
Yes, I am. Now, I'm an academic, which means I have the privilege of sitting in my office and thinking about things in their perfect application. And maybe the real world is more complicated and dirty, and I'm not out there implementing these things. But I like to think of public health as the art of the possible. And the possible is dictated solely by three things: public acceptance, political will, and resources. Now, we struggle with all three of those things in this country. Masking, for example, the public compliance continues to be poor in some places. The political will to implement it was slow, and the resources to acquire the appropriate PPE for medical personnel, for example, was slow. But if we can address those three pillars, public compliance, political will, and the application of resources, so much of this can get done. But to answer your question, yeah, I am frustrated. And the other element that drives the inability for us to accomplish some of these goals is a failure of imagination. Nobody imagined we could be applying rapid tests in these strategic manners. I mean, some people imagined it, but not the appropriate people. The thing about rapid tests, for example, is that they're not great. They have a higher than perfect rates of false positives and false negatives, but the imagination component in how you use these imperfect tools. They don't have to be used the same way that we use PCR tests. They're not diagnostic tests, they're control tests, they're screening tests. So it's that little rejigging of how we think about things that's needed here. So I'll say it again, what we often find in a failure to enact public health control over crises like this are failures of imagination. And that's disappointing.
Dr. Deonandan, thank you so much for staying awake. I've never, after thousands and thousands of interviews, that's the very first time I've ever said that to a guest. But I'm saying it for all the appropriate reasons. For those people just joining us, Dr. Deonandan was on social media earlier saying that he hopes he can stay awake. He's very sleepy. He's very sleep deprived because he's got an 8-month-old. Everyone understands what that's about. Doctor, all the best to your 8. Well, by the way, what is I don't mean to pry here. I know the privacy and all that. You don't have to answer this, but what's the name? What's the name of this little baby?
His name is Harrison.
Well, please give Harrison. Don't wake him up. Whatever you do, because he's sleeping right now. But next time you're talking to Harrison, please tell him that Uncle Chuck sends his very best.
I will do so. Thank you so much.